Good evening. Welcome to Larry Wright, joining about 100 members of the Chancellor's Council Executive Committee for a discussion this evening. Larry, the Chancellor's Council Executive Committee is the group of people that are among the greatest supporters of the university system and its 14 institutions. And they've all read your book, or they feel very guilty because they haven't read your book and it's sitting on their bedside table. So I'm going to briefly introduce Larry, although briefly in his case still requires quite a bit. He's been a writer for the Texas Monthly, the Rolling Stone for the last 3 decades, a staff writer at the New Yorker, where in 2012 he won the National Magazine Award for his profile of Paul Haggis, which became the basis of the bestseller Going Clear, Scientology, Hollywood, and the Prison of Belief, which was made into a multi-Emmy winning documentary. He's written 10 nonfiction books, including The Looming Tower, Al-Qaeda, and The Road to 9/11, which won the 2007 Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction and was named one of the top 100 books of all time by Time magazine. It's been published in 25 languages and was made into a series on Hulu. In addition to multiple screenplays, he's written and performed one-man shows in New York City and published 2 novels, God's Favorite in 2000 and The End of October this year. And if that weren't enough, he's also a musician, playing keyboard for his band Hoodoo in Austin. Personally, I want to thank Larry for writing God Save Texas, which is a terrific book now being made by Larry into a musical. It was an important part of my crash course on the Lone Star State 2 years ago. In fact, 2 years ago, when it became known in New York City that I was moving to Texas, one of my good friends said that I had to meet his longtime friend, Larry Wright. As luck would have it, the Wrights share a fence with Bower House, which is really convenient when you're looking for a place, our backyard, to have cocktails during COVID. So we're delighted to live in this great literary neighborhood. So I have my own questions for Larry, but I want all of you to participate also. So I have an iPad with a chat function on it for Zoom. And if you have a question, you can use the chat function on your computer on the Zoom program, and I'll see it. And then I'll decide. I'll be happy to ask questions from anyone except for Gordon Appleman. I just finished watching Larry's interview with Evan Smith, and my goal tonight is to try to let Larry talk more than I talk, which is clearly was not Evan's goal. So Larry, I remember reading someplace, or maybe you told me, that the editor at the New Yorker, David Remnick, asked you to write a book to explain Texas to the rest of the country, and that was the origin of God Save Texas. So what was the origin of The End of October?
Well, it actually began a decade ago. The filmmaker Ridley Scott asked me if I would, he'd read the Cormac McCarthy novel, The Road, which is this post-apocalyptic father and son wandering through the ruins of civilization. And so Ridley's question to me was, what happened? Because Cormac doesn't bother to explain. Right. And I thought, that's an interesting question. What would cause civilization to just crumble? And, you know, nuclear war, you know, but on the other hand, it's hard to find heroes in a nuclear war. And when I was a young reporter, I did a lot of stories about diseases. I was living in Atlanta, where the Center for Disease Control is. And at that time, I thought the CDC was a magic land. I just, you know, I admired the people that worked there. They seemed so noble. They were ingenious. They were courageous. You know, I just really admired them. And I thought, easy to find a hero in that world. And so that's where it became a script. It did not become a movie. Largely through my own fault, I couldn't figure out the ending for it. And also I hadn't done enough research. You know, in my work, I always feel like you have to do all the research and then let the story tell itself. So it comes out now, even if it's fiction. You know, in my world, research is the key, because if I understand what's going on in a way well enough to explain it to my readers, then I feel like it'll be authentic. It'll feel true. And, you know, and when I went back to this project, that's what I set out to do, is just research it till I really understood it.
So that leads me to the next question, which is, you did a ton of research. There's a whole lot of science and reality in this book. And in fact, that's probably what makes it so scary, that there's so much science and reality in it. So why didn't you do this, like most of your other work, as nonfiction?
I'm doing that now. Now the New Yorker has asked me to write a kind of history of how we got where we are now. And actually, I'm just finishing up the story. And, you know, when they ask me to write a big story, it's always, you know, a problem, because I get paid by the word. So, you know, of course, I'm going to write a big story. It's nearly 60,000 words at this point, which is far too big for the magazine. I don't know exactly what they're going to do with it. But I sent them 50,000 words last week, and they said add more personal details. So, you know, it's like you know, the python and the goat. You know, can they get their mouth around it? I don't know.
So the end of October reads like it could be a movie. Will it be a movie?
Ridley's signed on again, you know, but my experience in Hollywood is, you know, don't buy the house until you've eaten the popcorn. And so, you know, I'll believe it when I see it, but I would love for that to happen.
Yeah, yeah. So pandemics have been with us forever. And earlier this year, I wanted to try to understand a little bit better what people thought when they were going through these earlier pandemics. So you and I have talked about this. I read Defoe's Journal of the Plague, your Boccaccio's The Decameron again. I'm going to reread The Plague and read the one book I've never read, which I absolutely should, Love in the Time of Cholera. But I'm curious if, in addition to your research with the CDC and others, did you go back and think about, if you've already read or read any of these earlier plague works, and did any of them have any impact on you?
Oh yeah, I did. And I read all the ones that you're talking about. The one that you didn't mention that I found just really stirring is Pale Horse, Pale Rider by Katherine Anne Porter. And she, you know, actually pandemics and plagues are not very well chronicled. I mean, given how historic they are, people tend to want to forget them. And Katherine Anne Porter was a reporter in Denver. She's from just south of Austin here, but she got the 1918 flu and nearly died. Her newspaper set her obituary in type. And when she came to, her hair was completely white. You know, just a horrible ordeal. And it's a haunting, but exquisitely wrought story. But the other thing I did, I was intrigued by how pandemics end. You know, what happens next? And I searched for a medical historian that would, you know, be interesting to talk to. And I did a piece for the New Yorker about this medical historian I found, Gianna Pomata. She's a retired historian from Johns Hopkins, but she's Italian and she lives in Bologna. And so we had a number of conversations. And I asked her, what does this pandemic summon up for you in history? And she said, really, the Black Death, not in terms of the scale. I mean, it killed a third of Europe, but in terms of the consequences, her feeling is that, you know, the Black Death put an end to the Middle Ages. It opened people's minds because of all the things that failed to work. And, you know, excessive piety, the clerics that were in control, the medical establishment, which was based a large part on astronomy, astrological science, and all of those things failed. And in the face of so much failure, a new wind began to blow through, and that was the Renaissance. And it was a hopeful moment for me to think that we, with all that we've endured and a crisis that we still haven't measured, there might be something good on the other side of it. There would be a kind of spiritual and national renewal. I think that we've seen so many fractures in our society. It's a depressing period in our history, but it could mark an occasion for a change.
Along that line, I think I heard you say at some point that one of the differences between your book and now is that you underestimated the response of people. What do you mean by that?
Well, in my novel, the virus is more mortal than the one we're facing, although this one is so sneaky. It's got its own qualities. But I underestimated the willingness of individuals to voluntarily isolate themselves for such a long period of time at huge cost, not just financial cost, but emotional and spiritual. It's been an impoverishing experience and a depressing one. And yet people have, for the most part, willingly undergone it. You can see that it's fraying now, and it's harder to maintain that sense of solidarity that we had at the beginning. But in the novel, there were things that happened that haven't happened in real life. For instance, the food supply chain still works. Money's still available. If those things were to fracture,
and the stock market, remarkably compared to
the
$13,000
in real life, it's doing a lot better than it did in my novel. That's for sure.
Yeah. So people are going to be annoyed by this question. I'm sure it won't matter to anyone but me. But as a former English major and a passionate reader, I'm very interested in the structure of this and how you approached it. And as I started reading through and got to the 15th, 20th chapter, I started thinking you could almost think of a pattern here that that jumping back to this scene and then to this. How do you think about organizing something like this when it's fiction and you can do it any way you want?
Well, once we get into process, it's a little dangerous because I love talking about this kind of thing. But there's sort of three parts to it. It in some ways is classically laid out, almost like a classical theater, and in terms of the classical references, it is a little bit like Ulysses going off on an adventure and trying to get home. That's one part of the structure, is his, Henry's longing to be able to return home, and yet he's got this great quest that he's on as well. And there's a part of where he is going off to find out what's happening and trying to stop it, and then his failure, and then his in a way his resurrection. That's the arc of the story from his point of view. From the point of view of nature, it's not a very good, it doesn't turn out that well, and it ends in a fraught manner, and but I think it reflects my mood. I guess I feel like our country and our civilization is in a fragile state, and I've spent a lot of time in places that aren't democratic. They're dangerous, broken places, and I've felt that civilization is a little bit like a layer of ice. You can walk out on it and feel confident, but you don't know when it's thinning out until you fall through. And I worry that it's thinning out, and I think that that's maybe the novel reflects that perception that I have.
You have written before about an outbreak. And this is I think, very interesting difference from the one we're in now, this Fort Dix reporting work that you did. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, that was bizarre. 1976, there was an incident at Fort Dix, New Jersey. A young recruit, an Army recruit named David Lewis, was on a march, and he became incoherent. And they got him back to the barracks, and he died. Now, he was 19 years old. He was a very vigorous young man. And so he had the flu. But it wasn't the flu that most people had. Back then, there was a flu called A. Victoria, which was circulating on the East Coast. He didn't have that. And so they started looking through historic strains to see what it matched. And it came up H1N1. And that's the strain that 1918 was, the strain that killed between 50 and 100 million people. It killed 670,000 Americans. October 1918 is still to this day the most mortal month in American history. And so everybody in public health had dreaded the day when it might return, and they felt it would obviously come one day. And here it had come. And this young recruit died of it. There were several other soldiers that had it as well, but they didn't die. So the question is, what are we going to do? And the call by the head of the CDC was, we need to inoculate everybody immediately and as quickly as possible. And it was at that point that I went to Fort Dix and to write a story. And I was talking to the environmental health officer there, who was from Macon, Georgia, and I was living in Atlanta. So I said, I had spoken to David Lewis's mother, who was a nurse. And did she tell you about that pig? And I said, well, no. And, it's called swine flu. So, some pig he ran into, and I immediately, I fled and called the mother and found out that over Christmas, David and his fiance, this lovely young woman who was a nursing student and a pilot, they were going to go, Christmas drive from his home in her home in upstate New York around Oneonta down to his home in Massachusetts. It had been snowing. The road had been closed down to a single lane. And David and his fiance came upon a pig in the middle of the road. A big pig, she said, about 200 pounds. And so he tried to get around, he couldn't do that. So he nudged the pig, see if he could move, he wouldn't. So David got out and grabbed the pig by the ears and pulled him aside. So the question was, did the pig cough in his face? And because hundreds of millions of people are about to get vaccinated. Suppose the pig was sick and he infected David, and he's got the biggest dose of the virus and he died of it, but nobody else has died of it. It's not like 50 million people have died. So I had to find the pig. And so this young lady and I went up and down Route 23, stopping at all the farmhouses, and we found the guy who owned the pig. It was a house pig, and he had fallen out of a pickup. And this guy had been in a railroad accident, and he was missing his right arm and leg, and he was propped up against the refrigerator. And so we came in, and I described the situation. Millions of Americans are about to get this vaccination, and could be that your pig has the magic answer, and all I want is a little blood from your pig to send to the CDC. And so this guy turned to this young future, evangelical girl, and, honey, I know where you live. I know where your house is. You fuck with my pig, I'll burn your house down. I thought, well, welcome to epidemiology, right? So finally I persuaded him to let his vet come over and take some blood and send it to the CDC, and the pig had never been sick a day in his life. So 45 million Americans got inoculated. 450 people got Guillain-Barré syndrome. 25 people died, and Gerald Ford lost the election. So had that pig been sick, history might be different.
You've talked about the amount of research you've done and talking to doctors in the field, scientists, et cetera. In the book, you dedicate it as a tribute to the courage and ingenuity of the men and women who've dedicated their lives to service of public health. So what is it about these people that you find so admirable?
Well, you know, there's a combination of enormous intellect, you know, the schooling and the, you know, kinds of things, medical degrees or microbiology and that sort of thing, there's, you know, the severe education that they have to go through. And they're on the ground in, you know, adventurousness. You know, there are things I will do as a reporter that maybe a lot of people wouldn't do, but going to an Ebola hot zone, yeah. I mean, there are things that I just feel like that are scary, and yet they willingly charge into these places, and also they bear the brunt of these diseases. Healthcare workers, you know, they're the first line, and they, you know, so I mean, there's a modesty too, about a humility I found among those people. That, I mean, there was a wide range of people. There were people that, you know, were, you know, very proper Yale educated, you know, snooty a little bit maybe, but, and then there are these guys with bolo ties, and, you know, but they're all in the same game. And, you know, the erudite and adventurous, that's, you know, those are the things that caught my eye. And I just felt in some way they were kind of noble, and that there was a sort of Knights of the Round Table quality to them. So maybe I over idealized them, but they were very charming, and they really captured my imagination.
Well, Henry Parsons is an intriguing, very sympathetic protagonist. And I kept thinking, is this really Fauci? So I think the question that everybody wants to know is whether you interviewed Fauci and if he's in the book, since he's now either a rock star, you know, or the opposite, depending on where you go.
I've interviewed him many times now, but I hadn't before. And, but I've been in his building, Barney Graham. You know, there are two vaccines that are likely to be number 1 and 2 that we get an opportunity to have. One of them is by Pfizer, and it was designed by Philip Dormitzer, who was their chief scientific officer. And Barney Graham designed the one that NIAID, the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, that Moderna is making. And, you know, they're both close to the end of their trial. So both of those guys were my sources. And they helped me create this imaginary virus, and then they helped me cure it. And one thing I learned about people in the virus hunting and immunology field, they're essentially puzzle solvers. And, you know, I was giving them a puzzle to deal with. And especially I remember when I painted myself into a real corner in the novel when I had my hero on a submarine with this virus, you know, and I've got to cure it now. I mean, I created it, you know, so now I had to cure it. And so I would call my guys, and, you know, they maybe this, maybe that, you know, and finally Barney, I think, suggested, is it possible he could have some birds? And, you know, this is, I don't want to spoil it for people that, so, you know, I was totally at a loss, but now I had the best people in the world helping me figure out how to make a plausible, dangerous virus like that. And then what could we do if we were faced with it on a submarine where you have no laboratory or anything?
So I'm going to get to a question here from Steve Innes, but you know, he is commenting, drawing us back, I think, to the beginning about how much sooner you were thinking about this and working on it, and then you you had to have turned in a manuscript a year or so ago about a virus that really comes out of China, but explodes a little bit in Indonesia. When did you, because you have thought about this so much more, I started thinking about this really in March when I had to close down our campuses. And I mean, you know, in January and that kind of thing. When did you start thinking that the reality could be a lot like what I've been thinking about and writing about for years? And what did you think about that?
Well, I was in rehearsals for a play in New York that we put on in Houston in January. And it was a New Year's Eve when the Chinese authorities never said anything about it. It was leaked into a medical site. And so New Year's Day, in the medical world, suddenly they heard, you know, there's a strange new virus. There's some unusual pneumonias in China. Everybody's ears go open because that's how it often starts. And everybody remembered SARS. That's how SARS started, and the Chinese covered it up. So, you know, there was a great sense of alarm. And I was, you know, I guess that I was probably done fiddling with the manuscript because I fiddle with things up to the last minute till they rip it out of my hands. But book was coming out in the spring. And by February, you know, I knew that you know, even before then, I knew that we were going to be experiencing pretty much what I had written about, because it, you know, it wasn't as if I actually made this up. I read the playbooks. I studied the tabletop exercises. I talked to the experts. They told me what was going to happen, and I believed it. I thought, you know, this is going to come to America. There are things I totally, you know, I started ordering masks and, you know, gloves and stuff like that.
When?
Probably late January. And then February, we were in Houston, and mid-February, my director got sick. And Oscar Eustis, who's the director of the Public Theater in New York. And it wasn't really obvious that he was sick at that point. He was tired. He was exhausted. And we opened on February 20th, and he flew back to New York, missing opening night, and I knew something was wrong. He was one of the very first, I think, to get COVID. How he got it, I don't know. His wife was ill. But he was in the hospital for a long time and was very dangerously ill.
So there are a lot of things going on in this book. And again, we won't give it all away for the people who are just feeling guilty right now. But one of my favorite subplots involves the intelligence community and the kinds of things that are going on at the same time. I loved reading about the actual Richard Clarke, who's an amazing character, and I assumed the fictional Tilly.
Yeah.
But you know, I absolutely loved Tilly's rendezvous with the reporter at Ping Pong Pizza in Washington, and so. As I was reading that, I was thinking, now this is stuff you're drawing on from work on the Looming Tower and other things like that, as opposed to you know, your new research on public health. But is that scene with Tilly, a highly placed person with incredibly sensitive national secrets, with a half washed out reporter trying to get somebody is that the way Washington works?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of experiences like that. And, you know, the experience of having somebody leak things to you and stuff like that, it's you know, part of the game. And a lot of times people want reporters to know something for good reasons. You know, I mean, honestly, the flow of intelligence is so constipated that you almost have to leak information in order to get the public aware of important developments. And but Tildy's she's a purely imaginary figure. I didn't really base her on anything. I just thought about she would be a Russian Jew. She had experience in Russia, in the old Soviet Union. She detested Putin, and that's a profile that I thought could easily fit into the White House.
So another one of my favorite scenes in the book, and maybe it's because I'm a parent, but the discussion of religion, or more precisely of heaven, between Henry and his daughter Helen and I. So, as I was reading it, I was thinking, now, this isn't something that you did through research. So this sounded rather personal, and I just wondered if it was.
Yeah, it is, and in many ways, I mean, there's a lot of religious speculation in the book. Henry is an atheist, but he's persuadable. He's curious. He's been scarred by religious experience. I mean, there are two things that one is this association with cults, which has always been a subject of great interest to me. I've written a lot about cults, and and I had written about Jonestown. One of the most memorable and upsetting experiences I ever had was interviewing the three sons of Jim Jones. Not everybody died in Jonestown. These three boys were off playing a basketball tournament in the capital of Guyana. And one of them had to go back and identify 900 bodies, everybody he knew. I'll never forget that story. And anyway, that sunk in deep inside me. And then, I was in Saudi Arabia after 9/11. They wouldn't let me in as a reporter, but I got a job mentoring young reporters at this Saudi Gazette in Jeddah. And one of my first tasks was to oversee the coverage of the Hajj. And they wouldn't let me go to Mecca, but I was on the phone with my reporters all the time. And 2 million people were there that year. And one of the things I was surprised of, everybody gets sick, and my reporters, one of them said, well, I always take these green lemons, they'll protect me. And he got so sick, he had to go to the hospital. But diseases come from all parts of the globe, and they meet. Now, this is not unique to the Hajj. Mass gatherings like in public health pose a real problem. But it made an impression on me. What would happen if a new disease came and ignited at the Hajj, and then everybody flies off to all points of the globe instantly? There's no time to react. And so, that was buried in my mind too, and I unearthed it for this.
So, all right, folks, if you have a question, send it to me so I can ask it if you got something burning that you want to know about. And I also want to let people know, just because I know you're concerned about Larry's health, that probably can see it. We have a big plexiglass shield between us. We're more than, I'd say, 8 feet apart. Anybody else here has a mask on. And I had the former state commissioner of health, okay this setting. So Larry will be okay.
Although the animals all died.
Yeah, but we thought we wanted to get you back to Bauer House, even virtually, if not in person. So given the kinds of things you have done in your life, screenplays, novels, nonfiction, many journalistic pieces for different publications, your band, how do you decide now? We all as we age, think much more carefully about what we're going to spend our
really
time
true.
on
Yeah.
and devote to. What goes through your head? How do you decide what you're going to do next?
You know, you couldn't ask me a more difficult question. It's the biggest mystery in the creative game, I guess, but it's certainly true for writers. What are you going to write? I mean, I know how to write. If you tell me to write something like this, I can write it, you know, but what do I want to devote the remaining years of my life to doing? And it's hard. And what do you want to give yourself to, and what would you add to the discussion? Um, it's true that I write in many different forms, and I think that that's useful for me because, you know, if an idea comes, it usually comes packaged with uh, surprise, I'm a novel, or I'm a play, or you know, I hope it's not a poem. I need to make a living, but you know, those kinds of things usually come in that form. And you know, what will happen is I'll get intrigued by a world, and you know, like Scientology. You know, there's a world that I'm interested in, and how do I get into it? And so I look for a character. I call these characters donkeys. It sounds demeaning, but you know, donkey is a noble beast of burden and can carry a lot of information on his back and take the reader into a world that he's never been in. So I always look for a donkey that will serve. It doesn't have to be a famous person or a glamorous person, but it helps if he's in trouble and you know there's some conflict going on. Uh, so you know, in Scientology, I found that person in Paul Haggis, who left the church after nearly 30 years. And he was a two-time Academy Award-winning director. So he was the kind of person that my readers would not dismiss. He was smart. He had street smarts. He was skeptical. He was, you know, ferociously intelligent. How could he be a Scientologist? You know, I wanted the reader to be, you know, I pictured that most readers would read about Scientology with a sneer. And I wanted to wipe that off their face and make them really look at the struggle for belief and, you know, what does Scientology actually offer? So if I find something like that, then I just dive in kind of heedless of, you know, legal consequences and things like that. I just want to tell the story. And, you know, right now I'm kind of, I know I'm about to finish up this piece. I'll probably turn it into a book on COVID, but I'm already beginning to look over the horizon and wonder, you know, what is that other world that I want to explore?
So Bob Shepard, who I think has probably read the book twice now, is asking whether there'll be a sequel, but I'm guessing maybe the New Yorker.
Oh, you know, I've had that question several times and it's been in the back of my mind. The place that I leave it is in some ways a kind of invitation to go to the next place. And a story hasn't arisen in my mind yet, but I'm not dismissing it, but I appreciate the encouragement.
Maybe Henry Parsons could do press conferences with the president on. Carmel Borders asks, have you heard from the Chinese about your story? But I want to ask, because I'm just after having listened to you talk about Scientology, I'd be also interested in what your experience was. I mean, that's a pretty protective, you know, group.
Yeah.
What are the consequences, whether it's this book, the New Yorker piece you'll write on, I don't want to give that away either, or the work on Scientology, the book on Scientology, you know, how much of that comes back to you later from people that are angry that have read it or that sue you maybe? I don't know.
Well, the only time I've ever been sued was by Madeline Murray O'Hare, who was the famous atheist who lived here in Austin. And the basis of her suit, it was, you know, reported in the newspaper, it was a libel suit. the suit was, I was using her famousness without her permission. And so
That's pretty tough to get over the First Amendment.
right.
bar.
So I wasn't sweating it too much, but yes, there are times when, like the Church of Scientology had a private investigator. You couldn't really say follow me because I just stay at home. I'm in my house almost all the time writing and researching. So if somebody's assigned to me, it would be the most boring, sitting experience. But when I had public experiences, when I was book signing, even when my band was playing, this guy would show up, and it was, pathetic. I mean, the idea was to be intimidated, but and let me say that people who talked to me, the defectors in the church, they suffered. They knew what they were getting into, but the church persecuted them, and I regret that. I had to put them in that spot, and they willingly did it. But I didn't suffer, but we had innumerable legal threats, and from the magazine to the book to the documentary. China may not be happy with my story when it comes out, but I always try to give people the opportunity to respond to me. And I also, depending, like with Scientology, I had to imagine defending every word on the stand, with all the legal action. And so I took out a lot of the modifiers. I thought, if I have to stand by, you say that the church was very corrupt. What do you mean very? I thought maybe I don't need very.
So in the book, Henry has part of his past that he has trouble coming to grips with. But on the other hand, then there's Jürgen, who doesn't have trouble with it. He makes it clear that he's not on the side of man, he's on the side of nature. Did you talk to people who had worked in the field of biological warfare? Now, I know we shut down ours, at least we understand that we did, when Nixon was president, right? But did you talk to people about that, and what would allow people who train as scientists and doctors to devote their time to something that would be an offensively used?
It's terrifying. And I went to Fort Detrick where we did all of the, that biological warfare stuff. And it's true that it's been shut down, but there is a big building in the middle that is a total black box and nobody knows what's going on in it. And there is an equivalent thing, which is a little more morally nuanced. There are very similar experiments are going on that could be used for biological warfare, but they're called gain of function experiments. And Ron Fauchier in the Netherlands created a big storm when, I think it was 2014. He took an avian influenza H5N1, which was not a human disease at that point, but a lot of people had caught it from birds, and 60% of them died. And he ran it through ferrets and made it into a respiratory virus, which would probably infect people. And, he might as well have invented a hydrogen bomb. It was a huge stir. On the other hand, this is a disease that probably will evolve out of nature into humans at some point. That may be exactly what COVID-19 did. And so maybe it's best to, anticipate nature. But on the other hand, these things leak out of labs. And, even the CDC and Fort Detrick, Ebola and Marburg and anthrax have leaked out of those things. In the Chinese case, they had SARS leak out of a lab in Beijing on 4 different occasions. So, there's an on the one hand and on the other, quality to it. The process is very much what biological warfare looks like. But the intention is different.
So how worried are you that, some smart people everywhere who could work on this stuff, and the idea just scares the hell out of me that somebody could come do something in the water supply in New York City, or, the subway or whatever.
Yeah.
And I picked that just because of the concentration of people. It could be Austin, but how worried are you that that's just a matter of time before something like that happens, that something out of a lab, assuming it already hasn't happened, is used as a weapon, is undetectable until it happens, until it hits, just given what you've spent time thinking about?
I worry about it a lot. I mean, I've written a great deal about terrorism, and Al Qaeda was trying to find some way for, whatever weapon of mass destruction they could amass, and they were looking at biological agents. Even more threatening, I think, Om Shinrikyo, the Japanese cult. Do you remember the blind yoga instructor where they drank his bathwater? And it seemed like such a joke, but there were 50,000 people in that group, and a lot of them were engineers. And they were animated by Isaac Asimov's science fiction novels. But they were capable of doing a far more sophisticated organization than Al Qaeda was. And they were actively looking for a way to diminish the numbers of humans in the world. And so they would be the survivors. There are a lot of people that have similar impulses, and then there are just nihilists. And then there are people who are just incredibly careless. When I wrote once about the director of national intelligence, I was going around the intelligence community interviewing people, and they let me meet the guy that is like M in the Bond movie, the guy that invents all the neat toys, but they didn't show me any of those. But I asked him what he worried about. And he said what concerned him is that kids now who are making computer viruses will soon be able to make biological viruses, real ones. The technology is easily approachable. And, that really put a chill in me. It might be some kid would do something like that, but there are a lot of people that would do it intentionally. And I think that we have to be really concerned about it.
Well, when you mention that, kids hacking, I mean, I think, this has been a dreadful experience with COVID, and greatly lament the people that have died, of course, and that have been sick. But it has taken, as you mentioned earlier, put a great strain on people emotionally. We know there's been a large increase in mental health and emotional challenges that people have, including young people. But if we didn't have the internet, if we didn't have the information structure, I think how much worse it would be. I mean, we all went remote for work, and for school, but if we couldn't do that, the combination of the two would just be devastating.
Right. And that's one reason I took down the internet in the novel. That's another vulnerability. But I was looking at the fractures in society, and the things that we already know about ourselves and in our relations with other nations, and just add stress, which is what the function of the virus.
Well, when the internet went down, and when Henry had to try to find out about his family without any communication, that's when I started thinking of the road again.
Yeah.
And, just the miserable situation that we'd be in. Now, I've tried to keep this, at least so much as I have any control over it, from leaching into the current political debate because of the elections that are. But I have a question, and I'm going to be faithful to my members. And this one is, given all that you've seen and studied and written about, does it give you any insight into the way that we have responded now? I mean, I remember seeing someplace that among all countries in the world some years ago, we were the most prepared for pandemics, and now we're being hit the hardest by a pandemic.
Yeah, I asked Fauci that very question because it was in October of last year. Johns Hopkins published the Global Pandemic Preparedness Report. Look all over the country, all over the world, every nation, how ready are they for a pandemic? And the number one country ready for a pandemic was the United States. And on top of that, I was examining all the things that the Trump administration had at its disposal. It had that report, the Obama playbook that was passed to them. Is a fascinating document. It's just in case you happen to have a pandemic, here is what you do. And it's lengthy, but what's fascinating to me is all the resources of the federal government. There are, these organizations that will bring volunteers out, in case of, it's called DMORT, is the sort of Department of Mortuary stuff, but in case of a calamity, and you need to identify bodies, there are retired dentists and things like that. I mean, these things, there's amazing amount of resources. So is there evidence of, a possible terror organization? Well, you call the FBI and the Homeland Security, and this is the number. And so it's like a paint by number book, and apparently never cracked open. And then the Trump administration itself did a tabletop exercise called Crimson Contagion. And the story is an American traveler returns from China. He's coughing. He goes home. The day that he returns, his son goes to a crowded concert. 500,000 Americans die. It is eerily similar. And what's really chilling about it is that it forecasts all the problems that they were going to face. There's not going to be enough PPE. There's not going to be enough ventilators. The government is not coordinated. It lays it out. It was a mirror for the administration to look into and see what was wrong with it. And then finally, there's the fact that, America has the greatest medical scientific establishment in the history of the world. So all of those factors should have said, we're going to get through this. We're going to do okay. What other country could match our capabilities? What other country is as prepared as we are? And here we are with more deaths than anybody, with more than 200,000 of the million deaths in the world. And it's very, very hard to justify that.
So I'm going to wrap this up on a lighter and more positive note, I think. So I'm a huge fan of God Save Texas, and I got to see a sort of sneak preview of the musical back when people could get together in Austin, and I absolutely loved it. It was tremendous. It conjured up memories of Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, some of the same themes about the larger than life politics in Texas. And so when are people going to be able to enjoy that musical?
Well, I don't know when the theaters are going to come out of the coma that they're in right now. But Marcia and I and my son Gordon were the ones that are responsible for this. And we've been getting some local singers to pitch in on some of the songs. Matthew McConaughey sang a duet with, we're having fun with it, and we're going to start releasing it, maybe on, week by week, just to set the songs free, because we love the work that we did on them. And, theater is in an existential moment. So we're not going to wait for the theaters to get back open. We're going to do something, but it is a challenge for people in creative arts, but especially in theater.
Larry Wright, thank you for joining us this evening. Really
JB,
appreciate
I
it.
always like to talk to you. I mean, even though we have to skip over the shield here.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And thanks to the members of the Chancellor's Council Executive Committee. Appreciate you joining us tonight. We'll try to keep this going. We may not be able to keep it at the same level with Larry Wright, but we enjoy the chance to get together even if it's virtual. So thanks very much. Enjoy the weekend. And Larry, let's go have a glass of wine.
Let's do that. Thank you, JB.